Hello and welcome to the fifth part of Fundamentals of Hangar Development. This is another episode of War Robots Basics where I speak about principles of the game that may be especially interesting for newer players. In the first part we looked into a practical approach on how you can develop your War Robots Hangar from zero. In the second part we briefly looked into Silver Gear, the third part covered Titans, and the fourth part was all about motherships. Today we are going to talk about another type of secondary gear, pilots. Contrary to other gear, pilots are basically bound to a particular robot, apart from some exceptions. This makes them one of the most important secondary gear, but also quite expensive. Unlike other gear, pilots are leveled up with gold, and this requires different steps. I think most of you know how pilots work in general, but let's briefly talk about the basic features of pilots. Pilots can be bought for gold in a pilot center, or sometimes also in a regular shop. Some of them you can also acquire for real money. The latest pilots, however, can only be obtained from event chests or operations. Buying a pilot is also called hiring. Each pilot can learn skills that can be upgraded. The more powerful these skills are, the more expensive they are. Each shift of their level costs gold. Also, the level of the pilot can be upgraded. This is called promotion. Each promotion gives the pilot a higher rank. The more promotions the pilot had and the higher its rank is, the more skills it can learn. Each pilot can be leveled up to a maximum of level 70. This allows them to learn 7 different skills in a process. From level 1 to level 10, a pilot will learn and level up the first skill. From level 11 to level 20, a pilot will learn and level up the second skill, and so on. That brings me to the first common confusion. Skills can be improved in two ways. The first way is by advancing the pilot itself. This is done by playing, by watching ads, or by paying gold. In each case, the pilot gets experience, so the more you play or pay, the faster the pilot will advance and level up until it reaches the next promotion threshold. The second way of improving a skill is by leveling up the skill itself. A skill that is shown as grey is a tier 1. If you level it up, it becomes a tier 2 skill and will be shown in blue. Tier 3 is shown in purple. Each of these steps, that of course you need to pay for as well, makes the skill more powerful. So here is another common confusion. Pixonic calls the color of a skill a tier. For skills, tiers indicate how high the level of a skill is. It does not relate to how powerful the skill itself is. This is an important difference to tiers of other gear, where the different color usually indicates how powerful the type of gear is. Yes, sorry about that, I didn't invent it. There are two basic types of pilots, the regular ones, shown with a blue background, and legendary pilots, shown with a golden background. There are two major differences between those two. Skills of regular pilots can be leveled up 2 times, from grey to blue, from blue to pink, up to tier 3. Skills of legendary pilots, however, can be leveled up 3 times, 1 additional time from pink to gold, which is tier 4. This makes the particular skill even more powerful, but of course it also costs a fortune, usually some 2000 gold for one single skill. The second difference between regular and legendary pilots is that before even learning the first skill, a legendary pilot already owns a special level 4 skill that only this legendary pilot has. So it is already active at pilot level 1 when you get it. The special skill is usually linked to a specific robot, but sometimes also to certain types of weapons or buffs or gear. So if you think about this a little bit, you will come to the conclusion that by default, using any legendary pilot is better than any regular pilot from a performance point of view. Not only do legendary pilots have one more skill slot available, but they are also able to run better skills because they can be brought to tier 4 instead of tier 3. So the main reason why players use regular pilots is the cost. Legendary pilots typically cost 2500 gold each at basic level 1. The cheapest regular pilot costs only 100 gold at basic level 1. So using regular pilots can be a good option if you are a new player in lower leagues. You would typically use regular pilots and bring them up to level 10 or 20 in order to give a bit of boost to your first few robots. But as soon as you are approaching high level Diamond or Expert League, I would recommend you to only go for legendary pilots. Skills can be changed. You can either roll the dice or you can select skills from a list of all available ones. When you roll the dice, it costs you gold. The higher the rank of the pilot, the more expensive it gets. Probabilities are very low that you get a very specific skill, but probabilities are reasonable if you just need any skill that is somehow useful. So I would always roll the dice when the rank of the pilot is low. It costs a quite low amount of gold and it has another advantage. Sometimes the skills that you get are not at the lowest tier 1, but also at higher tiers already. Also tier 4 is possible. When you select skills from the list, they always start at the lowest tier 1. Funny trivia, this system was not always implemented like this. In the earlier days, after pilots were introduced, it always cost 50 gold to roll the dice, no matter what the rank of the pilot was. And also, there were no tiers of skills, but only one skill level. As a consequence, players transferred their pilots to other robots, and Big Sonic didn't quite like that. So in the end, so to say, the system got rebalanced and all of a sudden pilot transfers become very, very expensive. Who would have guessed that? So when it comes to legendary pilots, not all of them are specific for one particular robot. Some of them also have general buffs to certain equipment or gear. This is great because many of the older robots do not have any legendary pilot on their own. So this is a good opportunity if you love an older robot to make the most out of it. When you get a new skill for your pilot, it can get a skill out of two types. Either a skill that is related to the robot that the pilot is equipped to, or a skill that is related to any weapon type that you have equipped to this robot when you request a new skill. It is useful to know that each robot and each weapon have an individual set of skills that can be equipped to them. So it can be that for a certain robot, a certain skill is simply not available. The crazy electrician skill, for example, cannot be obtained for a pilot that is guiding a Natasha. Why not? Well, this particular skill enhances a shield and the Natasha doesn't have any inbuilt shield, so it wouldn't make sense. It's the same with the shot grouping skill that narrows down the particle spread of shotgun-like or some machine gun weapons. The shock train doesn't need that, so only for weapons like the Havoc or the Avenger this skill can be selected. But be careful, Big Sonic has changed the skill sets of robots and numbers of skill characteristics in the past, often without a shoutout, so don't be surprised if that happens again. So a big question is always, which skills should you go for? And this is actually a quite complicated question because it really depends on your setup, your playstyle and the game mode. There's one particular skill that is useful for free-to-play players, which is called Quartermaster. It reduces the amount of power cells that you spend with each activation of an active module. I would especially recommend that one if you run active modules that cost 40 power cells to activate. In long terms you save quite a lot. Weapon skills can especially make sense if you run weapons of the same type on a robot. For example, 4 punches on a behemoth, 4 rusters on a typhon or 4 cudgels on a capri. The shot grouping skill that narrows down a weapon's particle spread is not always that useful, but it can make sense if you're planning to use shotguns or machine guns for distances further than 100 meters, for example on a Havoc Typhon or a Hammer Behemoth. If you search for a particular setup on YouTube, there is a chance that you find a comparison video that somebody made about it. For example, scatters with or without shot grouping. Does it make sense or not? You can then see if it makes sense for your playstyle and the game mode that you prefer. It can be quite complicated to understand which skills can make most sense for a setup in a certain game mode. There are some obvious rules. If you play FFA, don't train any beacon skills on your pilots, of course it's pointless. Also remember the best practice that I mentioned when we talked about modules in episode number 2. Skills and gear should always emphasize the strengths of a robot. So if you run a fast beacon capper, it's always good to have the Roadhog skill equipped, which is a plain speed increase. And it's the same for very fast robots in general. The skill gives a speed bonus that is a percentage based on the base speed of the robot. So if a robot is already very fast, the benefit that it will get through this skill will be even higher. The most popular pilot skills among top players are actually the ones that just give you straightforward buffs in all situations. Mechanic, Master Gunsmith and Armor Expert. How do I know that? Remember that you can look up pilot setups of other players, at least the ones that play on the same platform than you. So simply go, for example, into the Legendary Players list and look it up. The super active guys shown there are usually in top clans that share the best setups among each other. So sooner or later they will basically all run the same setups that they found to be most effective on a battlefield. You will then find that certain skills are very popular for robots that are used for particular roles. Tanks, for example, are almost always optimized for maximum health. Often, a skill is also popular among particular robots, for example survivor skills on the Siren, the Harpy or the Orochi, or skills to boost shields on the Typhon or the Erebus. Also this makes sense because these skills greatly increase their effectiveness. If you like beacon games, there is one skill that I found particularly useful on your beacon cappers, which is the Invulnerable Raider skill. That one grants defense points when capping a beacon. So when you're new to the game, it is good to understand the mechanics of pilots, but it will not necessarily be your first priority. So at the start, just get some cheap pilots and give them somehow useful skills. You will get more and more into it by default once you reach higher leagues, when optimization becomes more important for advancing. So one question that pops up regularly is, there are more than one legendary pilot for a robot, which one is the best? Again, a good resource for this is to look up what top players are using, and sometimes it's just plain obvious. I don't know any top player, for example, that uses Louis Duncan as pilot for the Typhon instead of River Chase. Also, you will find out that Bernadette Wolf is basically the one pilot used for the Fenrir. Sometimes it is more split up. Misaki Ponche and Neon, for example, are both used for the Capri, but it depends on the role which one is better. Keep in mind that Big Sonic also nerfed pilots before. Veterans still vividly remember the nerf of Clive Vicious for the Blitz. From one day to the other, he lost a huge chunk of its effectiveness. Players were not amused about that move. Another popular question is, I leveled up a pilot, a new OP pilot came out for the same robot, what should I do? Well, it depends on the resources that you have and if you spend or not. In most cases it's not worth to switch because it's simply too expensive. When more than one pilot got released for a robot, it can be a sign that a nerf may come quite soon, so be mindful of that. Can you run the same pilot more than once? Yes. You can run 5 Adrians, or, as top players do these days, 5 Misaki Ponchi pilots on their 5 Capris. Or you can also run 5 Olga Minina pilots on 4 Natashas and a Cossack, even if that doesn't make any sense, both from a performance perspective and a lore perspective. Funny trivia, some pilots are based on real people. With Man and Adrian that's obvious, but also Michelle Dubois, for example, was based on a player that got popular by using Griffins and Ravens in her lineup. Andrei Kwasov is also based on a real person that lost his arm in an accident and that got supported by Pixonic. So that concludes this episode of Fundamentals of Hangar Development. I hope that you found it somehow useful. As always, your feedback is greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot for watching and see you on my channel.